What is LIGO?
I'll tell you about LIGO. This is what you call fundamental science, where we just have no real understanding of what we're going to find. But in our case, we had a particular mission. Einstein made a prediction in 1916 that there were something like electromagnetic waves, which is what's lighting us up and makes our radio go and everything that has to do with gravity. And that was controversial for about 50 years. In fact, even at the time he died, it wasn't an accepted idea. The idea was accepted when it kind of was derived right mathematically in about 1960. And since then, which is a long time, 60 more years, people have been trying to find it technically. And we finally hit the jackpot about 3 years ago. So we saw it. He was right. And in addition, we saw it from something that itself is interesting, which is two black holes colliding on each other and creating these things. So those are a lot of big words, but it was quite an adventure.
What was it like seeing two black holes colliding?
I'll make it even stranger. This collision happened 1.3 billion years ago when on Earth we were just converting from single cell to multi-cell 1.3 billion years to get here, and we detected it here. So we saw something that happened when the Earth was just beginning to have life.
What does that mean for us?
It means that the universe is pretty big and pretty complicated and pretty interesting.
What was your inspiration for Adam's apples?
No, the film came about, actually, it was a play. And I have a theater company in New York. After we had finished that season in the theater, I've always wanted to work more in film. And I'm sitting around and I'm trying to think about what to do because the economics in New York in the theater are not fun to deal with. And I said, well, I'd love to make a movie. So I actually converted the play into a film. And I raised enough money to do it. The story really, Chekhov is someone who has inspired a lot of people. When I looked at what I wanted to do, I said, well, if I really honored Chekhov, I would have to write a film that was taking place now, not something that would look back, like put it in the 50s or do something like that, which would have been a simple solution, but it wasn't what I felt I wanted to do.
What inspired you to do this?
In fact, it's the ultimate, false information that was spread on platforms at the beginning of the pandemic. Everyone started, talking about the coronavirus, the origin of it, and how did it spread actually. One of my colleagues had a look at my social media videos and told me, Mahmoud, how about we make this, to our viewers, to our audience in Al Jazeera, and let's try to make it entertaining. And yeah, that's a good idea. And I met with a few colleagues in our creative department who we started discussing how can we make this informative and entertaining at the same time. We started looking at the academic articles, trying to write the script and try to make it storytelling. And that's the way it started. And we were surprised with the amount of engagement we had with those type of videos. People were eager to know the right information about the virus. How did it spread? Remember, this was almost a year ago when the pandemic started. So people needed to know the information. Journalists need to take scientific information just like what Barry does and try to deliver it in a simpler way to the viewers in order for them to understand the importance of science. I'm a very strong believer in science, and I believe we should educate or help educate people and deliver this information to them in the simplest way possible in order for them to understand it. It has to be also in a storytelling way. And this is a big challenge, to explain the entire life cycle of the virus.
How do you keep everything relevant?
You know that we don't have much time to develop the story. It has to be in an hourly matter. And it's really stressful. So the way we had to think about it is the production of this report will take weeks, not hours. So we have to look at a longer scientific data a solid scientific data in order for us to build the story after 3 weeks or 4 weeks. It's relatively, a short term for cinema, but it's a very long time for in the news industry. So that was, a question we had to answer. In addition to that, as you said, information keeps changing, and we didn't discover everything about the coronavirus or the COVID-19 yet. It's a legit question that it may be, developed in a lab, but we still need, it's not the right conclusion to go to. We have to ask the question and then look at scientific evidence, and we shouldn't fall into confirmation bias by any means. And it's extremely hard in such circumstances to stick to evidence while everyone wants to believe what they like.
How do you know when you made a discovery?
In pure science, we were taught by Newton how to follow the scientific method and ask the right questions afterwards to validate whether something's true or not. So we often in modern science use statistics to be able to tell what the probability is, because you never know with 100%. But if you can assign a probability and have done it scientifically, you've done pretty well. That's the best you can do. You ask the questions, and then if you see something, you have a big task to see if it's really right and whether you can establish it as the truth. And we had that problem. It took us months after we made this observation to actually determine how to tell whether it was right or wrong, and then how to prove it.
What is our understanding of time?
We don't understand. Time is one thing that physicists barely understand. For example, we have no idea really why time goes in only one direction, why it can't go backwards. There's no physics law that we have that says that, except something we call causality, that everything that happens was caused by something that happened before. But that's not really a law, it's observation. We don't understand very much about time. It's, of course, time, I just talked about 1.3 billion years. So it's something that we have a big wish that we could cross time barriers and go a long ways. There's some little escape routes in quantum mechanics and so forth that give you some glimmer that you might be able to evade just time flowing in its regular way. But for the most part, it seems to go straight on.
What was your family life like growing up?
Well, the world I grew up in, my mother kept telling me that we were special, and I kept telling her things that I won't say right now because I didn't want to be special.
Who did you look up to?
Well, the person that I think I idolized as a person, not just as an actor, was actually my godfather, who was Francho Tone. Francho was a Renaissance man. When I was young, he'd take me, they had a place up in Canada, and we would go up there and we would go hunting and fishing and canoeing, and it was a world that was totally different from the world that I grew up in, because I felt, it's not that it's more real, but there's something, I need to be in nature. I need to be in that. And I'm a city kid. So that's something that now we're in France, and I'm a couple of minutes from the ocean, and I just feel better. When I'm in New York, I know I'm okay if I remember to look out the window and see the river. If I forget, then I know I'm in trouble. Yeah, it's just, I always felt that I marched to a different drum in a way, even growing up in a world where a lot of the people were extraordinary human beings. Sometimes I don't know why I know what I know. I was just surrounded by things. And, my sister would say, we learn by osmosis. I want to say this whole thing about time, which fascinates me. I think I do travel in time, and I can just go sometimes I'm in other worlds. I could be sitting wherever I'm sitting and I'm somewhere else. And I can't explain that. And certainly I'm not a scientist, so I can't explain it on a scientific level. But there is something about an artistic process in which one's imagination perceives realities that later come to be true. And I think that that's true in science also. Einstein talked about imagination all the time. He thought that he could do what he did because he thought like a child. The whole idea about seeing two black holes and things like that is just extraordinary to me. I have difficulty conceiving it. a conception of what time or space is really hard.
Well, there's definitely four dimensions, but some people that do physics have this theory called string theory. You've probably heard the name, and it has 11.
It's hard to know what the truth is. It's a very difficult thing. You change your perspective on the world, and the truth changes. And I've always wanted to know what is the deepest truth. What is the universe, as universal a truth as possible? And I know that sometimes in my work, the things that I do, the play, the movie, I'm driving underneath to try to say, well, what are we actually like? Not just what we think we're like, but what we actually are like. And it's my passion in life, is just to know as much as I can about people and the world. I actually think that that's what I do. I think I express it in an artistic domain, but I think what I really do is I'm trying to find out what reality really is.
How do you handle the job?
It's sometimes difficult in tough situations. You have to split your emotions, human emotions, from what's going on the news. We see a lot of bad news, unfortunately, and this is just the industry itself. What you have to do first you have to take a step back, and then you need to look at the things from a different perspective. You have to stick to your guidelines as much as you can. You will have to try to take that third party position and say, okay, what is the information I can deliver to those people and tell them the story of this event that's going on without placing my own opinion into it or trying to, take things into a biased situation. This is something that we can't always be successful at. Sometimes it's really tough not to do this. But I strongly believe that journalists need to take that position. They have to be extremely cautious. They have to stick they have to be factual. The moment you stick to facts as much as you can when you build your story, and then this is what's going to distinguish you from other type of information that's spread throughout. We have a huge problem with digital platforms. Information spread, fake news spread out a lot easier than facts. This is something we need to tackle, and we face challenges, Deborah, every single day with this. How does it work, and that sticking to the facts is always less juicy for the people who are listening to it. They would like to believe in more of a conspiracy theory, and it's not always factually right. So we have to give those facts an entertaining dimension to it.
Is it possible to have good, unbiased news?
I think that people are actually desperate to know what the truth is. And I think that it's very hard. It's a dangerous thing, actually, to be truthful. In the world that we live in, people do much better when things are half-truths. And a half-truth to me is fundamentally a lie, because you're distorting reality. I worked for several years at the National Film Board of Canada. I would deal with a lot of guys that were making documentary films. And I would have arguments. I took the other side. I said, it's almost impossible to be neutral about what you're doing. And the older I get, what I actually feel is that objectivity is not a distanced observation. It's a clarity of perception with your senses. You have to feel what's true. And this is very hard because we're not raised to trust our feelings.
We need to deliver such an amazing discovery to the audience in a very informative, entertaining way in order for them to appreciate science more and try. We need, as humans, to invest more in science. Unfortunately, we as humans, we learned from tragedies. We started investing so much in biological research when we got the pandemic. But that started when we had SARS, the biological research centers started communicating with each other, and we had some sort of a platform to communicate the research. Now, with this pandemic, it's the first time in history, for example, we're using mRNA vaccine. The technology of the mRNA and the theory of it was placed or discussed tens of years ago. But because of the pandemic, we're trying to move forward. We need to support such initiatives, scientific initiatives, and it's our responsibility, at least as a journalist, to try to deliver this information, correct information, and the importance of science to the audience.
What does the lack of interest in STEM field-related jobs mean for society?
If they see and hear science in their everyday life, they'll respond to it much more. When it's part of your life, or if it's something off to the side, then it's something that you don't do. I also think there's a point, and that is that we've learned from the pandemic, and that is that science is not national, it's international, and it's worldwide. And the sooner we learn that, the better we're able to handle things. And handling the pandemic has all these problems. How you deliver the vaccine worldwide, for example, doing science itself. It shouldn't be competitive between nations. And scientists realize this, but there's a lot of obstacles.
What are you working on right now?
I'm teaching right now. This has opened up the possibility of really doing astronomy. I mean, what we did is prove something of Einstein's, and it's something very interesting physics-wise. But because what we observed are things in the universe, it gives us a totally new way to look at the sky. Everything we know about the sky first came with our eyes, and then we developed telescopes of various kinds. But all of that is some form of light or electricity. And this is totally different. It's gravity. So we can look at the universe in a totally new way, looking at gravitational effects. That's what's open. And so we're trying to make these detectors. It's a little bit like Galileo 400 years ago was the first one to take lenses that had been made for glasses and put them in a telescope. He didn't invent the telescope, but he was the first one to point to Jupiter. And he discovered there were 4 moons. And that was the beginning of modern astronomy. And since then, we've built instruments of all kinds and learned a tremendous amount about the universe that we live in. And now we have a completely different, we're in the birth of it, but we have a completely new way to look at the universe.
Do you have other fields of study?
I'm a computer engineer, and I just work in journalism by, coincidence. My family are, all engineers, and that's why we love science. I mean, we love math. We love to look into the information, and we try to, when working in journalism, it taught us how to simplify the information that we thought, making it more complicated sounds more interesting. Actually, it's not. It's the opposite of it. Just one point I wanted to raise here about the global collaboration around the world, international collaboration. I think we as humans, unfortunately, we start working together when we see an imminent threat to all of us all of a sudden, and then we start listen, we need to collaborate in order for us to face this pandemic. And that created a huge shift, I believe, in the past couple of years that we didn't see in the past 50 years. Again, I believe Barish project was a great thing to point the spot at. One of the ways you asked, Deborah, about how can we deliver this, how can we make this more interesting to people, we can support investigative journalism. We can support documentaries to make projects like Barish more accessible to people. We need to make this in a more storytelling way to make people love science. I remember reading this post back at the beginning of the pandemic. One of the biologists said, listen, those famous people, you pay them millions and millions of dollars, and you pay your biologist 2,500 euros. Go let those famous people develop the vaccine for you. And that was, striking for me when I read that. I'm like, listen, you're so right. We sometimes under-evaluate our great scientists and those people who really work for us, and we need to point to have the spot on you, and make the next generation inspired by your work. It's for the greater benefit for all of us.